Hey guys, my name is Sanak, and for today's Star Wars Lad special, I want to cover the possibility of live action content coming to the two most interesting eras of Star Wars that we have right now: Star Wars The High Republic and Star Wars The Old Republic, and how that can all possibly look like. Only a word separates the two wildly different eras. There are a lot of rumors flying out right now about live action content, specifically films coming for both the High Republic and the Old Republic. But honestly, that kind of raises more questions than anything else. Okay, let's look at Star Wars The High Republic first. The High Republic is a carefully plotted multimedia project that will eventually connect to the Disney Plus original series, The Acolyte. There are rumors of a movie also coming out for this era, but there's also the rumor of a game from Quantic Dream. So, how will a film or any sort of visual content fit into this era that has its own story group and has connections that are even felt in the tiniest of comic book arcs? We also have to look at the Old Republic. The Old Republic has been hinted at for being recanonized for many years now, but there are a lot of questions that come with that. For one, the most iconic parts of that era are KOTOR 1 and 2, two of the most well-known role-playing games, and creating a definitive storyline out of that might irk some fans, and putting a hand anywhere near that for sort of adaptation will rustle a lot of feathers. There's also the question of what exactly is covered by the Old Republic. Will Tales of the Jedi be better integrated if brought into canon? Will KOTOR 3, that was planned but never came to fruition, be prioritized for storytelling purposes over the ongoing Legends content of Star Wars The Old Republic? Are we going to forget about some of the most iconic parts of the Knights of the Old Republic comics? So yeah, there's a lot of questions for both the Old Republic and the High Republic. Before I give my thoughts on how Disney and Lucasfilm should handle the High Republic and the Old Republic in terms of live action content, we should also consider the hints and the methods that they've kind of been following so far, most notably in the Mandoverse. Now, the Mandoverse is centered around The Mandalorian, and it's going to have a bunch of different shows set around the same time period: the early days of the New Republic, including the Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Rangers of the New Republic, and more. There might still be things coming out that aren't announced. But overall, all of these stories will culminate into one climactic event that, if you kind of read between the lines, could be an heir to the Empire canon adaptation. But it also raises the question, is Star Wars going to be following the MCU model? Look, what I'm saying right now is pretty obvious to a lot of us. We're fans of both Star Wars and the MCU, but if it's not already that clear, let me explain a little further. The Mandalorian is not exactly the hugest character. I mean, he is now, but Din Djarin is a pretty low-level Mandalorian in terms of Mandalorian society and importance to the galaxy. And if we look at Robert Downey Jr. and Iron Man in 2008, well, Iron Man was a pretty B-tier superhero, and Robert Downey Jr. was not exactly in the best shape financially or career-wise. But after 3 phases of Iron Man as a centerpiece, we resulted in Endgame, which was one of the biggest cinematic events in history. So, being that Disney owns both Star Wars and the MCU, it's not too much of a stretch to think that with the success of The Mandalorian and the announcement of all these other shows that will eventually, we don't know when, but will eventually connect into one climactic event, that Disney and Lucasfilm are trying to replicate this MCU formula in a more compacted form for the small screen. And what a lot of people are considering and rumoring it to be an heir to the Empire adaptation. I mean, it's not going to be the exact same story, but if the model works, why not follow it? Okay, just a little addendum for the MCU fans out there. I know Spider-Man Far From Home is technically the end of Phase 3, but let's be real. Endgame was the end of Phase 3. So, if it's not obvious already, Lucasfilm and Disney are doing their own version of the MCU storytelling with the Mandoverse and all the shows related to The Mandalorian. resulting in one climactic event that will be hopefully something close to the effect of Heir to the Empire. But should the same sort of storytelling be used for the High Republic and the Old Republic? Personally, I don't think so. Personally, I don't think the High Republic would work with an MCU formula. It's a really tightly woven multimedia project, as I've already said, but it's much more than that. It's three whole phases and several waves within these phases. I mean, wave three of phase one comes out in January 2022, which is a couple months out. And this whole era might last till 2025 or 2026. So throwing in a film or movie in the middle of this era might not be the best move because there's so many details that are packed into every single form of text media. And if it were to work, it might have to be something more akin to The Acolyte, which is a little bit more far flung out, closer to the prequels, and far removed from all the events that are currently being followed in the High Republic. And there's also the whole question of the Quantic Dreams High Republic game that's rumored. Is there going to be a definitive storyline that people can follow through that is certifiably canon? Quantic Dreams is known for games that are very visually appealing, but provide a lot of character choices and options. And that could just be really confusing for canon junkies who already know that what they read or hear from the High Republic so far is exactly what's happened. So yeah, I don't think the MCUization of the High Republic would work in almost any shape or form. I might be wrong, but it just doesn't seem like it would fit. While I've made it pretty clear that the High Republic wouldn't work with the MCU model, the Old Republic wouldn't either. But the Old Republic has way more problems. Let's just look at KOTOR 1 and 2. Like I've said, for a lot of people, it's sacrilegious to do an adaptation of these because they're role playing games and it's all about player choice, whether they're on the light side or the dark side or somewhere in the middle. Along with that, if it was adapted for a TV show or a movie, there's a lot of questions about what happens exactly between KOTOR 1 and 2. Some of it is resolved in the Revan novel and elements of KOTOR 2, but they're pretty standalone games from each other. Then there's a whole thing with Tales of the Jedi, which is set 20 years before KOTOR, but looks archaic. Ships are still using sleeper systems instead of hyperspace. People like the Jedi use equipment that looks far more outdated. It looks a lot more feudalistic, and a lot of the stuff happens, especially earlier on, in just different solar systems instead of galaxy-spanning war. And some of my favorite characters, like Ulic Droma, are from this era, and they're referenced in the KOTOR games. But in no way or shape or form does this whole Dark Horse comic storyline make sense 20 years before Knights of the Old Republic, which feels honestly quite like the prequels. You're telling me in 20 years the galaxy goes through a bunch of war, a bunch of Sith uprisings, and then returns and normalizes, and then it happens again in 20 years, but it's even worse? Sure, if it looked like it did, but and when it goes from Tales of the Jedi to KOTOR, there's just so much technological advancement and so many different groups that, while similar, are in very different shapes in terms of their strength, where they are located, and so many different elements. And we're not even considering the Knights of the Old Republic mainline series that came out from Dark Horse that was honestly one of their crown jewels, and that's set 8 years before Knights of the Old Republic, which follows Zane Carrick as a Jedi Padawan on the run after he notices and finds Jedi Masters slaughtering their Padawans for a ceremony, which he was supposed to attend. And as he's on the run, that's how the story unfolds. And while that is a comic book series as well, and a lot more known than Tales of the Jedi, which has been kind of forgotten with time, there's a lot of references between those and the games. But the game doesn't reference the Knights of the Old Republic comics in any way or form because it is kind of wrapped up before the events of the games. And then if that isn't convoluted enough, Star Wars The Old Republic is set 300 years after Knights of the Old Republic 2. And it makes huge justifications for Revan's empire and his change along with Malik when he returned to the galaxy. And It's a fun MMO. There's some good class stories, interesting stories on different planets, but it's a lot, and it kind of just gets wild and out there. And sure, it's fun, but it's not necessarily an easy storyline to follow either. So you're combining a story that spans over 500 years or so, and it's still ongoing because Star Wars: The Old Republic is the only continuing Legends material out there because there's no canon Star Wars MMO out, and it's still doing pretty good numbers. And you want to say, hey, we're gonna recanonize the era? Okay, what falls under the era? Will these elements be brought together? I don't know, and I don't think it would if it was following an MCU format. And the biggest thing with the MCU format that while it could kind of work with the High Republic if it's in one specific time period, the Old Republic spans centuries, and the MCU kind of takes characters and puts them all on the same timeline within 20, 30 years at worst. So yeah, I don't think the Old Republic would work with an MCU formula, but hear me out. I think there is a pretty clear model to follow for it. The Wheel of Time. So, what is the Wheel of Time and how can it be used as a model for the Old Republic era? Well, let me break it down for you guys. The Wheel of Time is one of the most famous and beloved fantasy book series of all time. There are 14 books and one prequel, and this whole long spanning epic fantasy series is compared quite frequently to The Lord of the Rings. So you know it's pretty freaking good. And it's getting its first ever adaptation on Amazon Prime Video this Friday. If you want to know more about the Wheel of Time and you're interested in fantasy book series, check out content creator Daniel Green. He got me into the book series through his videos, and I mean, it's been a ride. I myself am on the third book, The Dragon Reborn, and I'm having a great time reading it. But just in these first three books, I have noticed a very interesting element to the story. It's really hard to explain who the Dragon Reborn is and what that has to do with the world, what the events are happening, but let me explain a few elements here. Unlike other fantasy book series, the Wheel of Time is set in a post-apocalyptic version of our Earth. The time period that we know as is considered the Age of Legends, where men and women and people of all kind are able to channel magic in a way that we use, scientific technology in sci-fi movies and in the current world. Unfortunately, the Dark One tainted the male half of the magic and corrupted all the male channelers and drove them crazy and insane, causing this event called the Breaking of the World, which has repercussions for centuries, if not millennia, before the timeline of the Wheel of Time books. Now, one of the male channelers, the dragon, is reborn in this era, and he's supposed to lead the heroes against the Dark One and all his evil minions in a climactic final battle called the Last Battle. But the interesting part here is that both the heroes and villains will be able to call upon people from the Age of Legends. Now, the Age of Legends, as I've already explained, is a timeline thousands of years removed from the events of the Wheel of Time book series. But already in the first two books, both the heroes and villains are able to bring out the different people of this era. They use artifacts from this time period. They have history and knowledge from this time period that still shapes the world that they're in. And they interact with these people from thousands of years ago in real time using summoning calls and equipment and all forms of magic. And I think, hear me out, I think this method could be pretty interesting for the Old Republic. Look, I think it's too much to ask of live action audiences to watch a character from the Tales of the Jedi era like Exar Kun to jump into 300 years in the future and be summoned into the Star Wars The Old Republic era. It just would be hard to comprehend and understand. But what I'm saying is, if we follow the Wheel of Time model and actually space out this whole Old Republic timeline properly, whole multimedia projects would make a lot more sense and still keep the feels of all these different eras of the Old Republic. Have Tales of the Jedi feel like the Age of Legends, archaic, weird, strange, filled with magic and rituals, and has an effect somewhat in the clothing and the artifacts discovered in Knights of the Old Republic. But instead of being 20 years before, which is just a generation before, make it 300 or 400 or 500 or whatever many years before. It's got to feel distant and archaic. It's got to make hyperspace feel weird because, I mean, if you look at the High Republic, hyperspace travel is still kind of being discovered. It might be rediscovered if a little bit of context is being put about how the Old Republic era completely wiped out and changed so many different things. But as it's currently constructed in the Legends timeline, it doesn't really give people that opportunity. Now, what are you going to do with Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars The Old Republic? Honestly, you got to undermine a lot of Star Wars The Old Republic because a lot of Star Wars The Old Republic undermines Knights of the Old Republic. I know that doesn't make any sense, but what did I just say in my first sentence? Exar Kun jumps from Tales of the Jedi to Star Wars The Old Republic. What about Knights of the Old Republic? Knights of the Old Republic is still the most famous, the most iconic, the most visually distinctive part of the whole era. But characters like Bastila Shan and Revan and the Exile and Malak, they're all just bits and pieces and weird parts of legacy stretched out and ruined in a way in Star Wars The Old Republic. I mean, that image of the Revan ships that I put up earlier in the video, so many people dislike that storyline. So why give it any value anymore? Keep the best parts of that era, like the Cold War with the Sith returning and all that stuff. Maybe keep Revan as like the first wave of a greater Sith empire. Sure, do all those things, but don't make it 300 years in the future. Make it only a generation or two separated from the events of Knights of the Old Republic, and don't undermine what those characters achieved in those original Knights of the Old Republic games. You do that, you scrunch the timeline instead of stretching it out, and you stretch the timeline instead of scrunching it out. And I think it works so much better. And it follows the way the Wheel of Time does it. It makes the Age of Legends and the 100-Year Wars feel like very different and distinct periods of time, where the 100 Years Wars feels more medieval and feudalistic because of the breaking of the world from a sci-fi utopia like the Age of Legends. I know I'm rambling. I know a lot of this probably doesn't make sense to you guys, but so much of the Old Republic could be made into something wonderful and awesome in live action shows and movies and games and everything, and way more expansive and galaxy changing to affect the 1,000 years of peace of the Republic, the rule of two of Darth Bane, all these different things. Hell, you can even make the Old Republic era end with things that are still artifacts or effects for the High Republic to touch on or discover, and still have the new Sith Wars kind of be included as the final touchstone, so that way Darth Bane's story is brought in a lot earlier instead of being spread out 4,000 or 5,000 years. I'm rambling. It's a lot. I know it might not make a lot of sense, but just think of the Wheel of Time and how it properly spreads out the timeline so that when Lucasfilm and Disney eventually decide to make live action Star Wars movies and TV shows, the galaxy shaping events are going to be so massive, so huge, and have an effect over hundreds of years instead of thousands of years that will make actual sense and will be able to distinguish itself from the more character story driven world of the Skywalkers and all the people they affect from episode 1 to episode 9. That's all I got to say, but I hope you guys consider checking out the Wheel of Time and understanding why I love the pacing and so many different elements of the story, and why I think the High Republic and the Old Republic really can't use the MCU model, even if it is being used for the Mandoverse. Thank you very much. If you enjoyed this video from the Star Wars lads, please make sure to check out other videos on our channel and subscribe to us, and make sure that your notification bell is on so you don't miss any new release. We have videos out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and our Friday video also comes out on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and several other podcast platforms. If you want to follow us on social media, check us out on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. If you have any comments or suggestions, or you just want to reach out to us, just leave a comment on our video or on any of our social media posts, and we will respond and sometimes even feature you on some of our episodes.